welcome to the real estate market update for 2023. I'm Paul Hurst with Berkshire Hathaway. Thank you. I'll be your host. God, that's going to cost me. Today we're going to be using AMC's new seating pricing model. So all of you people in the front, we're going to be passing around a bucket. You're going to have to throw in a few more dollars. Okay. The jokes are all going to be news related, so if you don't watch the news, they're all going to drop like a spy balloon. So I really need it. Got a few housekeeping reminders. This seminar will be recorded and available through the SBAOR newsletter and the SBAOR website. We'll be raffling off items throughout today's event, so please pay attention. I think you need to be here to win, right? Yes, must be here to win and in your seat. Please fill out the surveys throughout the event and turn them in for a free car wash. That's always a big hit, so make sure you do that. And those surveys are really important to help us plan for future events, so please do that. Make sure you get your parking validation ticket at the check-in. So the ticket you came in with, you hang on to that, you get another ticket. When you leave, you put the ticket you came in with into the machine first, then you put the little one that they give you at the front that says you paid. Otherwise, you're stuck here. Please put your phones on silent. As always, if a phone goes off, you're buying drinks for the room. And reminder, the 2023 charity golf tournament is coming up on Thursday, May 4th, benefiting Habitat for Humanity and specifically the CODA Affordable Housing Project. Please contact Laura Fisher or Casey Gillis for details. A couple of little things I wanted to bring up. For those of you that know me, I'm really tech crazy. And I was a little worried when I saw a news article about a new AI-driven platform for sale by owners. Like, we need something else to compete with, right? I also read that technology was designed by the same people that did Ticketmaster and Southwest Airlines, so I think we're going to be okay for that. Now, the one I am worried about, though, is that GPT, which is that self-learning AI program that writes stuff for you. I thought, okay, let's give it a try, something simple. I wanted to do a social media post. So I uploaded a picture of a property we closed, a little detail, the price, and I said, please give me 2 short lines to post on Facebook. It came back with really in capital letters and a question mark, that price, question mark, and then 5 scared cat emojis. So what we learned is ChatGPT has already learned how to be snarky. At this point, I'd like to introduce our 2023 SBAOR President, Todd Shea. Todd.
All right, good afternoon. Let me raise this up here a little bit. Yeah, a little taller. Okay. Thanks for coming this afternoon. Just a quick thing for me. Again, what a great panel we have today. Thank you guys for taking the time out to do that. Again, these events take a lot of time to prep, and for our panelists, it's all about behind the scenes today. It's kind of just the big payoff for it. So thank you for taking the time behind the scenes to do all the work that you guys have done. Cristal and Kat for the residential side, Jordan, thank you for coming for CAR, and Gene on the commercial side. It really means a lot for us to do that, so thank you guys. We're gonna have some great perspective from all 3 today. And for those of you attending and investing in your business, thank you for taking the time, supporting our association. Again, it's weird in this I'll use frothy market right now. And it's important for you guys to pass along good information to not only your peers, but also your clients. And my hope is that our association can continue to provide you the tools of education to keep our community of realtors in the top of our profession. With media, headlines, and realtor market updates, saying all kinds of things right now, as agents on the ground, we also know we're seeing some other things as well. So I'm excited to see from today what the truth is, and I challenge you to take that and use your platforms and talk to your clients about what we learned today to really educate our members and our peers. So with that, thank you to Casey Gillis for putting this on. Our sponsors, thank you for setting up all these great booths today, giving us a bunch of swag to take home. And with that, we're ready to go. Let's get into it. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. By the way, give it up for Todd. These great videos he sends out all the time are just really terrific. So we're watching. Okay, I'd like to thank and welcome to the stage our featured sponsor, Homebridge Financial Team, John McCuskey. You want to come on up?
Everyone's busy, I'll try to go quick. We're thrilled to be here as a sponsor this year. It really means a lot to us, and we're happy to help out here as well. I know it takes a lot to put these events on, so we want to thank Casey. She's got 2 sick kids at home, so I know she's got a lot on her plate right now. There's some new faces behind me. They may be hiding. We did hire some great people this year, and we're really proud to have them on the group as well. Tim Dugan, most of you know him, great reputation, very talented. Holly Onak, he's been around for a long time and does a great job as well. Keith Dennis is a good friend of all of ours, and I think it really rounds out our office having them here. We're really optimistic about 2023. Hard markets like these, I think, bring out the best in us. You know, they make us dig a little deeper and work for it more, and those that put in the extra effort really come out on top. We spent a lot of time at Homebridge this year trying to find new products, things that are different niches, something to differentiate ourselves, and it's really helped us kind of close some more deals, and meaning for you guys, means to create and close more transactions as well. So none of you bought a ticket to see me talk, so we'll move it forward here quickly. So thank you for everything and enjoy your evening.
A special thank you to the 2022-2023 Statistical Review Committee. If you'd stand up when I call your name so we can all thank you and acknowledge you. Chris Agnoli, Diane Johnson, Jackie Walters, Committee Chair Jim Whitmer, Kalia Rourke, Karen Shackle, Liz Heitman, Matt Genovese, Patrice Serrani, Samantha Ireland, Sue Irwin, Jennifer Lemert, and Marcella Simmons. Thank you so much. You guys put this great event on, and so we're very grateful to you all. And also thank you to our door prize raffle sponsor, the Santa Barbara Independent, one of our faves back there, Sarah. This year the grand prize is 3 $100 gift cards to local restaurants including Toma, Oku, and Lokita. So thank you for that. Our other supporting sponsors, First American Title, WFG Title, Homeowners Financial Group, Fidelity National Title Companies, First American Home Warranty, Vacation Rentals of SB, First American NHD, MG Lending, Guaranteed Rate, Move Green and Honor Storage, Direct Mortgage Funding SB, Cornerstone Home Lending, Wells Fargo, and Brick Kicker Inspection Services. So thank you all. Let's give them a round. And our broker sponsors we'd love to thank: Village Properties, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, California Properties, Suncoast Real Estate, and Keller Williams. Thank you. So we're going to be talking about the market heating up a little bit, and it seems what we're getting is it's really heating up. In fact, we're going to be taking offers on this carton of eggs tomorrow, and I know that's short time for a pre-approval. If you can show that you paid off your last month's gas bill, you're in. Sorry? Is it listed on SBAOR? It's a pocket listing, sorry. Oops. Okay, I'd like to welcome and thank our first presenter, CAR's Jordan Levine. Jordan is the Vice President and Chief Economist at the California Association of Realtors, which, as we know, is a statewide trade organization of real estate professionals with more than 200,000 members. Jordan is responsible for CAR's housing market and economic research, as well as policy analysis for CAR's legislative and governmental affairs efforts. He has a passion for home ownership, fair housing, and housing supply, and regularly represents CAR to its members, industry groups, policymakers, and in the media. Jordan has a bachelor's degree in economics from UCSB. Give it up. And a master's degree with merit in international economics from the University of Sussex. Prior to joining CAR, Jordan worked in consulting for clients ranging from cities, counties, and the state to private businesses and academic institutions. Please welcome Jordan Levine.
much. It's good to be back, and it's good to be back in Santa Barbara, as always. I was going to say I have a lot of good memories here, but I don't know that I remember much, but definitely good times. I guess that kind of comes with the territory of being a gaucho, but happy to be here talking about the market. You guys got me right at the right time because I'm actually a lot more optimistic now than I have been over the course of the last 12 months. If you go back to March when we rolled out our initial forecast in 2022, we were one of the first ones to call for modest price declines, and everybody was kind of in denial at that time that the market might shift. Now we've kind of flown to the opposite extreme where I'm becoming more optimistic and everybody else is in kind of panic depression mode. So going from denial to hysteria, hopefully we'll work some of you guys back towards the middle a little bit. And I battled with what to call, what the theme of the speech would be. I started out talking about channeling your inner data nerd, because I do think that this is an environment where the data can really be your friend. There's a lot of scary headlines out there. Bob and I were talking just right outside about the brother-in-law effect, which I think is still very much alive and well. I just went and bought a new car, and the guy said, "Whoa, you work for SBAOR?" He goes, "You should check out this email I just got from my brother-in-law that told me we're on the cusp of a foreclosure crisis and prices are gonna tank and I should just wait to sell my house, or I should cash in now while the getting's good," and all of that stuff. And so again, I think no matter what side of the transaction you're working with, buyers or sellers, this is an environment where I think the data can really be your friend, help you cut through a lot of the noise and have some of those conversations that maybe are in the spirit of channeling your inner data nerd, but my better judgment told me to kind of call it managing expectations and providing context and perspective. And I do think that is kind of the recipe for success. That's how you cut through all the noise and the scary headlines and get folks focused on what really matters. People ask me all the time, how do I convince buyers to buy or convince my seller that it's time to lower the price? And my opinion is that we're not here to convince folks to do anything, but rather to really provide the context and the perspective they need to make the best decision for them. And I think that is something that's easy to get lost in the shuffle when you're hyper-focused on the most recent scary headline that you just read. So I do think the recipe for success, again, is about managing expectations, providing that context and the perspective that you might not be getting when you're very short-run focused. And again, we don't get into housing to time the market and buy low and sell high and do all this kind of whiz-bang financial savant stuff. It's about getting in for the long haul and reaping the benefits of home ownership, which are so well documented, and that remains completely unmarred by the current ups and downs in the economy. Talk a little bit about housing demand. Housing demand has certainly softened, and we'll kind of go through and document some of that stuff, but more importantly, talk about what the changes in housing demand means. And it's not always, again, that thing that comes top of mind, right? That there's less housing demand, market's gonna fall apart. I don't think that's the case. In fact, I think buyers in particular really forget the fact that a shifting market is actually a good thing for them and creates a lot of opportunities on the buy side. Yes, rates are higher than they were last year. They're not particularly high by objective standards, right? I'm still the son of a guy who used to walk around bragging about his 12.5% mortgage rate back in the 80s, and all of his buddies had 15%, first, second, third, all kinds of crazy stuff happening. But the market's also a lot less competitive, and sellers are willing to work with you in a way that they haven't been forced to do in several years as the market was so hot. We'll talk a little bit about housing supply and how that did normalize a little bit last year, but we're still essentially at all-time low levels. And while I think that's gonna restrain the number of transactions that we're gonna see come down the pike this year, I think it's also gonna be the thing that precludes us from having those big price declines that we saw last time around and that your brother-in-law keeps telling you are just right around the corner. We're gonna talk about what the future looks like through the lens of all of this data that we've seen up to this point in time. And I do think that you don't want to take this year for granted. I'm more optimistic. I think we're probably at or even slightly past the bottom in terms of transactions, but I do think it's going to be a slow creep back up to that 450,000 units that we hit last year. And even though I think your brother-in-law isn't looking at the data closely enough when he's calling for 30 and 40% price declines again, we do think that the price environment will be somewhat soft, even though it's not going to be a major sell-off, with the important point being that it's not 2008 all over again. We just simply do not have those same ingredients and fundamental imbalances bubbling under the surface the way that we did, whether it was with prices, mortgage underwriting, et cetera, that made us so vulnerable to a financial market shock that just really got the snowball ball rolling downhill. And so we'll talk a little bit about why we should have a little bit more resiliency this time around, even as the market shifts. And then of course, I'll just wrap up with what it really means for us as individual real estate professionals out there working with buyers and sellers in the field. I think, again, buyers have a lot more opportunities now, assuming that you can absorb the increase in interest rates. There's sellers who aren't going to just write you off because you have to sell your house first before you can buy the next one. We're hearing about folks doing rate buy downs and closing cost grants and or credits and things that would have been total non-starters even just 9 months ago when rates were still really low and they could pretty much pick between whatever over asking price offer came in the day or two after it hit the MLS. On the other end of the spectrum, you have buyers who think, it is 2008 all over again and I'm going to come in with a crazy low ball offer and get all my closing costs paid and rate buy downs and I'm going to basically name my price, and I just don't think we're there yet either. And again, I think the data is going to be your friend in trying to have those conversations. On the sell side, still an amazing time to sell a home. I know that the days on market is a lot higher today than it was this time last year, but it's not high, right? And same thing with foreclosures. I read an article the other day that said, foreclosures were up like 85 or 90% or something like that. And I kind of laughed to myself because I thought we weren't allowed to do foreclosures last year. So we went from like 0 to 2, and that's like 1,000 billion% increase, but it's still a very small number, right? If I have $1 and you give me another $1, I just got 100% raise and I've still only got $2. And that's kind of where we're at on the foreclosure side. I do think that the market shifted and sellers have to go in with more managed expectations. Homes aren't selling as quick. It's not as ferociously competitive as it was last year, but prices have barely budged. Homes are still selling quick by historical standards. We've just gotten so used to being so incredibly spoiled by a market that was hypercharged by the lowest interest rates of all time that we're now just kind of coming back down to earth. But I think if you go into it more strategically, with managed expectations, and you have a killer agent, then you're going to do really well for yourself. And so again, I think this is where you can really lean on the data and blame me to be able to have those more challenging conversations that really, don't just help you survive the next 12 to 18 months or however long this kind of shift goes on, but to really set yourself up for success for the future. Because clients, I think, ultimately really need us now, probably more than ever, right? If you were selling your home last year, you didn't have to do a whole lot. Just sit there and look at all the beautiful numbers that came rolling in. But the bad news is that they really need us. And so we've got to step up our game as individuals, be up to speed on what's happening, have the data at our fingertips to be able to answer those questions that are kind of at the forefront. And so I'm going to jettison all of my training, which they told you to sandwich bad news in between 2 pieces of good news. And we're just going to go straight into the bad news because this is the stuff that's making its way into the headlines. And then we'll talk a little bit about why it's not as scary as what it might seem on the surface. So we're releasing January data tomorrow, but even through December, you can see that the pace of transactions really started to drop off pretty precipitously as rates started to go up last spring. And after having 2 years of essentially decade-high levels of transactions, in fact, at one point at the end of 2021, we were running almost a 500,000 unit pace in terms of transactions, which isn't just better than where we were before the pandemic. It's as good as we've seen it going all the way back to the last housing cycle. If you look at where the numbers are today, it's somewhat scary, right? The sales number was down about 45% on a year-to-year basis in December, meaning that we had roughly half the number of transactions that we had at the end of 2021. And if you look at where that kind of coincides with historically, we're, again, not just down to pre-pandemic levels, right? We are at essentially the lowest levels we've seen going all the way back to the end of the last financial crisis. And unfortunately, when you look at how that kind of shakes out across the state, it really corroborates this idea that it's mostly a macro-driven environment right now. Because whether you're in the kind of super affordable Central Valley markets or Southern California or here on the Central Coast where we live, we're all essentially in that kind of 20 to 30% range in terms of annual decline in terms of transactions, with the year-to-year data, the most recent stuff, the dark blue, continuing to drag us down to a lower level. And you can see here in the local data, and I certainly don't want to kind of jump ahead of the local market experts that are really dug in, but you can just see that that same phenomenon kind of played itself out here in Santa Barbara. In fact, we were on the leading edge, I think benefited from a lot of these remote working, housing refugees from Southern California and the Bay Area that had the opportunity to jump on property in the Central Coast. And you can see that we had a really strong run of pretty consistent growth over the course of the last 4 years. In fact, if you look at the kind of growth rates and how they are segmented out across Santa Barbara County, you can see again that we had 3 years of really good growth. And these are sorted, by the way, from lowest priced on the left all the way up to highest price, but you can see how well the very high priced markets in particular really benefited from the fact that high income earners were incredibly insulated from the effects of the pandemic, right? If you're a remote worker, the shutdown didn't affect you that much, right? You kept your internet connection, you went down to Starbucks or whatever, and you continued to make money. You didn't have to commute, you weren't paying for parking and all of that stuff. So in many cases, the very top end of the income spectrum was doing even better than ever financially as a result of the pandemic. And you can see how that disproportionately benefited places like Montecito, which had like 300% growth over the course of the last couple of years in terms of transaction size, right? You've seen that start to die off a little bit, the same way that we see in the state and regional data. And you also see that we've had some of the first price declines that we've seen in over a decade. So in December, prices were down about 2.8% on a year-to-year basis. This is the median price, right? But it's the first time that we've seen a year-to-year decline since the last economic cycle. And so you have buyers that have been kind of scared off of the market by the brother-in-law effect. You have some folks that have just been hit square on the chin in terms of their purchasing power because they just can't absorb the effect of these higher rates, and that has started to translate into a deceleration in prices, which up to this point have been growing not just by double digits, but at this time last year, we were seeing 25, 35% growth in median price on a year-to-year basis. If you look in the local market outside of Montecito, which we only have January data shown here, but you can just see what an incredible run that we had in prices going up to 2022 that has since eased off here just a little bit. And I think a lot of this we can kind of lie directly at the feet of this Fed persistent war on inflation, right? They have not taken their foot off the gas, and even as the financial markets continue to celebrate the fact that we're past peak rates and all of that stuff, I think we've still got challenges ahead of us, and you can see here in the most recent data on rates, the Freddie Mac number is up a little bit last week, but it's come down from the 7% range where it was at towards the end of last year. So buyers have a bit of a reprieve going for them right now that, again, your brother-in-law forgets to tell you about and just is worried about scaring you off the market. But rates, even at 6.5, right, or 6.1, are much higher than they were at the kind of rock bottom levels that we saw at the end of 2021, where the 30-year fixed rate mortgage hit 2.65%. And I just really sad that my dad's not around to take advantage of this, because he would be out there with his foot on the gas, as it were, buying properties. But this is the stuff, the perspective that you lose when you're looking on a 12-month window and going, yeah, 6 is higher than 3, I'm not buying a house, right? And forgetting the fact that 6% by historical standards is an incredible mortgage interest rate. When you think about what that means from a kind of macroeconomic standpoint, though, I do think that we can expect demand to take a while to start coming back in a more robust way. So this is from our purchasing power calculator that we have up on CAR.org, and I think is kind of one of these ways that you can have some of these more difficult conversations, not just with buyers and talk about what it means that rates have dropped from 7 down to 6%, but also with sellers who are a bit more intransigent. I've sold a house before, and your agent comes and tells you you probably need to consider a reduction or whatever, and you're like, what? What do you mean? My neighbor sold their house for all this money, and it's a very emotional conversation to have, but I think if you use the data, it can really help to level set expectations. So I went here and just picked out a hypothetical household in Santa Barbara County. I wanted to pick an example that would be relevant for a market like Montecito with very high prices, but I realized I only had household incomes going up to $500,000 a year, and that used to actually mean something. Today, not so much, but I went with the highest that we had. So we picked out a fairly affluent household. They have some money in the bank, right? So they want to put 20% down. They want to have a relatively low payment relative to their income, meaning that they're shooting for about a $13,000 a month monthly mortgage payment all in, right? Taxes, insurance, principal, interest, all of that kind of stuff. Well, if you look at what that household could afford in Santa Barbara, back when rates were 3% last year, they were looking at about a $2.8 million home. That, kind of got them about 165 options that were on the MLS here in Santa Barbara last month, which equates to more than half of every active listing available. But you can see what happens to this household now that rates have jumped up where they were at 1.7%, and you can see what a big bite that takes out of purchasing power. They're now looking at about a $1.9 million home. This is a really fun tool. If you ever just want to go nerd out, you can see how all the different markets change, right? Like, oh, I can't afford Santa Barbara proper anymore. I've got to go to Carpinteria or whatever. You can see the bedrooms, whether you can still fit in a single family, or you have to get a condo now, and all of that kind of stuff. But this is kind of the reason why I think even as we're past the worst, we should keep a nose to the grindstone mentality when it comes to our own individual business, because there will be some folks that won't be able to absorb the increase in the effective interest rates. This is also a great talking point for convincing folks why they shouldn't drink the Kool-Aid and wait around, right? Because rates went from 7 down to 6%. You've got about $80,000, $90,000 worth of purchasing power back just on the basis of that 50 basis point reduction. And I think that's a story that's worth telling, because when you look at the metrics on buyer demand, and we have now, I think how many green bars is that? Five weeks of mortgage application data for this year, and you can see that even as we're having that typical seasonal rebound as the year starts off and buyers start to come back into the market after they've enjoyed the holidays and all that kind of stuff, we're consistently still underperforming, not just where we were in 2020 and 2021 when the market was so hot, but even below the pre-pandemic levels of 2018 and 19. And so even as, yes, there are some folks who can't afford higher interest rates because they were right on the bubble there, you have a lot of folks who could still afford to get into housing and, presumably doing so over the long run. That's still a great investment, and yet they're being scared off of the market by negative headlines and all the kind of Kool-Aid effect that's still very much alive and well out there. The kind of challenge is that even as we're seeing that typical seasonal ramp, and you'll see this when we get to the sales data too, we're just starting from a very low level, right? We had sales that, again, dropped to decade low levels at the end of last year, and so even as we creep back, we've got a long hill to climb to get back to where we were. But again, now that rates have dropped by 50 basis points or even a little bit more, you can see that kicks that same household back up above the 2 million mark again, right? And so this is the kind of stuff where you don't want to objectively say this is the absolute best time for you to be able to buy, but for me as a buyer, that would be important information to know, that I can go out and offer $100,000 more than I was, just 6 weeks ago without affecting that $13,000 a month payment that I'm still shooting for. And again, these are the stories I think that we need to help tell to get some of those buyers who really could benefit from the long term on home ownership off the sidelines because they've just been scared off by a really pessimistic headline. Let's talk a little bit about the broader economy, because it's not just the interest rate effect. I do think that kind of ongoing war against inflation, the higher rates, what it's doing to consumers will potentially tip us into a very modest recession as we get into this year. We're not super pessimistic on the macro economy, but we do think that consumers could potentially start to run out of gas. And so I didn't pull in the January data for CPI, but it shows largely the same trend, which is that inflation got really bad, right? At one point last summer, we were running 9% price increases, and that's the cost of everything from haircuts to laundry and et cetera, you name it, cars and everything else across the board. That has since fallen into the 6% range. If you look at the Fed's PCE deflator, which is another weird, nerdy, esoteric variable that they like to look at as a measure of inflation, it's doing even better than this. But the point is that I think the worst of the inflation story is behind us. The supply chain started to open up, right? You've got folks that are delivering cars onto car lots. We can get computer chips again and all of that stuff. And so I think the inflation numbers will continue to get better, but again, we don't want to pop the champagne corks prematurely because we've still got a long way to go to get back to that 2% Fed target. And so even as I think we're probably going to continue to move in the right direction, it's still very much a kind of elbow grease environment. And I think consumers or clients, buyers and sellers out there are still gonna be up against it in an environment where inflation continues to increase. And the reason why we are forecasting a very modest recession, and we don't think it's 2008 all over again by any stretch, but if you look at where the economic growth has come from since the end of the pandemic, we've been almost entirely consumer driven. If you look at the US economy as a whole, we're still about 7 out of every $10 generated by consumer spending. So government, international trade, residential, non-residential construction, all of that stuff together is about 30% of the overall pie. But more importantly, consumers have been about 95% of all of the growth. So consumers are the biggest slice of the pie, but they're also the only slice of the pie that's really been growing over the course of the last couple of years. And when you think through how sustainable that is, how much can we continue to rely on consumers to propel the economy forward, that's where I start to get a little bit concerned about the second and third quarter of this year, because we talked through the inflation numbers, which are about 9%. Incomes are actually growing faster than they have been in over a decade. We're getting 5 to 6% income growth pretty consistently, but it's not 9%. And if you look at how folks have been able to kind of bridge that gap between the costs and the increase in what they're making out there, this is it, right? We've been doing it by bleeding off savings, which really built up significantly, because Uncle Sam was depositing money directly in our bank accounts, which was nice, or I guess we're in tax season now, so you tell me if that was nice or not, now that you gotta pay them all back. But savings rates are below the pre-pandemic level and come dangerously close to hitting 0%. More concern is the debt balances, right? So the light blue stuff on the right-hand side, that's what the econ nerds call revolving debt. That's essentially credit cards. And credit card balances have been growing by 15% on a year-to-year basis. And so when I kind of think through how much we can continue to enjoy the level of growth, given that it's been all consumer driven and that a lot of that spending has come not from income, but from savings and credit cards, it has me concerned that we could see the economy slow down. Even if we don't tip into a recession, I just think that the consumer's eventually gonna run out of gas, because eventually savings rates hit 0, your credit card gets maxed out, and you realize you can't afford that 85-inch TV or whatever it is that you have on your shopping list. And when you look at the bond markets, it kind of corroborates this short run risk to a modest recession. What I'm showing you here is arguably the most nerdy economic chart you could bring. This is the yield curve. It measures the difference in rates on long-term treasuries and short-term treasuries. And I won't belabor a corporate finance lesson here, but all I'll say is that when the rates on short-term treasuries go above the rates on long-term treasuries, it doesn't make sense, right? The longer I'm borrowing money from you, the more you should be charging me, because you could do a whole lot of other better things with your money. I could walk off, get hit by a bus and never pay you back. There's just a lot more risk involved and a lot more opportunity cost of having your money tied up for such a long period. And when you see what's called here an inversion of the yield curve, that means that those low rates are higher than long rates. It means that no one wants to buy the short run treasuries, right? And so they've got to jack up the rate, lower the price, however you like looking at the bond market best, in order to get those treasuries moving. And this is one of those economic indicators where it's essentially batting 1,000 in terms of being able to predict a recession. Every time we've had a sustained inversion of the yield curve, where financial markets are scared off of short run treasuries, we have seen that followed by a recession of some description down the pike. We're actually now on 7 months of inversion, and in fact, even more inverted than we've seen over the course of the last 2 to 3 business cycles. This isn't, a magic thing that creates recessions, but it does suggest at least that financial markets have that kind of same level of skepticism about our ability to maintain the momentum. This is another one of these indicators that I really like looking at to kind of figure out whether we're on the precipice of economic challenges or not. I like it both because it's also batting 1,000 in terms of predicting a recession. You can see every time we get stuff in the red, it's very quickly followed by or either coinciding with a recession, but also just because it's a common sense number. This is real net worth on a per capita basis. So we add up all the assets, the stocks, the homes, commercial real estate, you name it, take away the inflation and then divide it by the number of people that live here in America. And when this number is growing, meaning that people are getting richer, the economy does well, right? And that makes sense. When I'm more wealthy, when my house goes up, when my stocks are worth a boatload of money, I go out and buy that boat, take my family on the trip, and when I feel poor, I go into a hunker down mode, right? And if you look at this chart on the far right-hand side, even though we don't have fourth quarter numbers yet, with the stock market volatility, the ongoing population growth, and the inflation that we've seen, we've already had 2 quarters in a row where average net worth in the United States has fallen. And again, that doesn't bode well for ongoing growth in consumer spending, because not only is everything costing more, I'm running out of savings, my credit card is maxed out, well now I'm poorer on top of that. And I think that that is why we can expect that the economy won't enjoy the kind of recovery speed of growth that we've enjoyed up to this point. So that's the bad news. The good news is that we are probably past, and I know everybody's looking at data in the rearview mirror, and that's pretty much where your brother-in-law's email stops, right? He just goes, yep, yield curve inverted, rates higher, sales down, it's time to jump ship and cash in, and we should all move to Arizona or what have you. And I just don't think that's the case. And I think, again, this is where perspective and context is everything, because even when it comes to the price numbers, right? Prices were down 2.8% on a year-to-year basis in December. What they don't tell you in the newspaper headline is that prices were up about 35 or even over 40% if you include 2022 over the course of the last 3 years. And so yes, a 2.8% price decline is the first time we've seen that in over 10 years. But that still leaves prices about 38% higher than they were before the pandemic. And so it's not the case that we've got a bunch of upside down underwater homeowners that are about to throw their keys back to the bank and get the ball rolling on our next foreclosure crisis. And again, I showed you the local data. I don't know why that Ventura data is in there, but if you look at the local data, we're in that same boat, right? If you go back to that first chart that I showed you on local prices, we're still way higher than what we were before the pandemic, even though we had a bit of a decline over the course of the last couple of months. The other thing that I would point out is that there's a seasonal component to prices that is totally being lost in the media. So yes, if you look at the statewide number, we peaked at over $900,000 in California, and they were off that number in December by about 14%. That's the number that they ran with in the headline, right? And that's the thing that's being emphasized out there. But we would have expected to see prices fall into December no matter what. I went back and looked at data going all the way back to the late 1970s, and I'm looking at here on this chart the difference between the kind of spring home buying peak price and the winter trough price. And there's always a seasonal lull in home prices. People like to buy in the spring and in the summer, so they get moved in before kids got to start school and all of that stuff. Then we go away for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and the housing market starts to ramp back up again at the beginning of the year. Well, if you look at the data of the last 40 years or so, you're hard pressed to find a year where prices in California didn't fall by at least 6% from that spring home buying peak to the trough in the summer. And so yes, prices are down a little bit, but some of that is just normal, seasonal cooling in home prices. And in fact, the price declines look twice as bad as what they actually are, right? That headline number makes things seem worse than what they actually are, because we're just measuring from that very high peak spring home buying season to the trough in the summer. The other piece, which I also think is highly relevant from a Santa Barbara standpoint, is that the mix of sales has changed incredibly. I showed you the chart for transactions and how Montecito was up like 195% or whatever it was 2 years ago. It was still up about 75% in 2021. And we were actually flat in Montecito, I think, for the most part, give or take a little bit last year. A lot of transactions happening at the very high end of the market. We talked through the kind of high end of the income spectrum outperforming the broader economy. That has an effect, at least on our prices, right? Because when we report out prices, we report on median prices. And for the non-data nerds out there, a median price is simply laying out all of the transactions on a line from lowest price to highest price. The median price is the one in the middle, right? So you don't even have to do any math or anything. You just pick them out in the middle. But what that means is that when we were seeing explosive growth at the top end of the market in places like Montecito and places like Manhattan Beach down in Southern California and things like that, you can see here that the market overall was growing by about 10% in California in 2021, but that was mostly because the top end of the market was like doubling, right? We were getting almost 100% growth and stuff above $2 million. And so when you lay them out on a line, you have so many transactions clustered up here at the high end of the price spectrum, it artificially inflated the growth on the way up. And now that that's started to normalize back down, you can see that 10 million and up was down a little bit last year statewide. It actually still outperformed. All the other lower price segments were down even more than that. But just because we're not having that explosive growth at the top end of the market anymore means that in the same way we were kind of artificially dragging up the median price on the way up, it's exaggerating how much prices have come down. Now, it is not the case that the individual home out there is worth 2.8% less than it was last December. Part of this is a kind of artifact of the data because we don't have all of those $10 million homes selling at the same pace that they were. And you can see the same thing in Santa Barbara County, right? We just had really explosive growth across the board, especially above 3 million, right? And that has since started to cool down a little bit. Actually, 10 million and up was still up last year locally, but it wasn't up by 150%. So we still have that kind of normalizing in the mix of sales out there that's exaggerating how soft prices actually are. Again, doesn't mean that we're not in a market shift, but I think it means that your brother-in-law kind of missed the boat when he tells you you're going to go out and get a like 30% price reduction on this property and save a couple of $100,000. And you can see that as well if you look not at growth in the median price, which is the dark blue stuff that I'm showing you here, but if you look at it on a kind of quality adjusted or per square foot basis, in fact, even as the overall median price was down 2.8%, if you look at the median price per square foot, the decline is a little bit less than half as bad as what that kind of headline number would have you believe. It's not a completely different story that the market's going up when everyone says it's going down, but it's a much more nuanced story that shows that the actual data supports this idea that it's not as bad as what those headlines would have you believe. So that's point number one, right? It's just part of this is super nerdy data stuff that's happening out there that's making the market seem worse than it is. But I think, you know, the scariest part of the brother-in-law effect is this idea that there's going to be a flood of inventory and huge price savings that you can reap just by kind of sitting on the sidelines for the next 6 months. And so I wanted to just take a minute to kind of dispel that brother-in-law effect, that we're not on the precipice, right? If you go back to 2008, and I know this is a terrible chart with too much stuff on there, but I wanted to show you delinquency rates before the last recession and the current level of delinquencies in California. So 2009 is when the official recession began last time around, but even the year before that in 2008, we already had 7% of Californians not paying their mortgages on time. We had all these kind of teaser rate, pick-a-pay, ninja loans and all of that stuff where people's loans had reset, and even before prices started to decline, we're in a kind of untenable situation in terms of their affordability. If you look at the most recent data that we have right now, this is inclusive of a 7% rate, right, where transactions have started to go down, and all of that stuff is baked in, and we still had 98% of Californians paying their mortgages on time. That is a much different scenario than where we were before the start of the last recession. Not only is that just a good number in and of itself, right? Only 2% of mortgages are currently delinquent, but it's also an area where California is outperforming the vast majority of the rest of the United States. So Californians in particular have really prioritized their housing, and they may have fallen on tough economic times. They'll let you kind of, come repo their car or what have you, but they're making sure they stay on time in terms of those monthly mortgage payments. And I just don't think we have the same kind of incentives there for folks to start throwing keys back to the bank and walking away from these homes, especially through the lens of a mortgage underwriting standard that was much, much tighter, not just for the last couple of years, but really for the last decade. We've been underwriting mortgages that have an average FICO score, still I think in excess of 720, but for the vast majority of the last 10 years, they were even higher than that, like 740, 750. So really just skimming the cream when it comes to who we are letting into the housing market And these were folks that documented their incomes this time around. They put money down, and they're also now locked into the lowest mortgage rates of all time, which brings me to my next kind of point of whether we're gonna see those same kind of conditions that were really required to precipitate those steep price declines that we saw last time around. So I did you a huge favor and saved your eyes from having to go dig through all 2.3 million mortgages that Freddie Mac makes available on their website for you to go through and look at where mortgages are. And I dug through every single row of that data, and I summarized it in this beautiful pie chart that flies right in the face of your brother-in-law's email newsletter, because it shows that about 85% of all of the mortgages out there on Freddie Mac's books right now are locked in at rates below 4%. Virtually every single mortgage out there today is at a rate below 5%, right? So this is a much different scenario, and I think creates a kind of lock-in effect that makes me not concerned about prices, but more so about sales, right? Because I think this is gonna be the new capital gains thing, right? Where people have an incentive to just stay put in those homes because they don't wanna get out from under that sweetheart mortgage rate. And indeed, if you look at the MLS, it kind of corroborates this lock-in effect of hyper low existing mortgage holders, right? This is the number of new listings that we're putting on the MLS every week, week by week, running right up through, what's today, the 15th? So yeah, it was right up through the weekend. We've got about 6 weeks of data here. What you can see here is that the number is still depressed. In fact, we're putting about 30% fewer homes onto the MLS in January than we were even last January, when listings and inventory were at an all-time low level. And so again, just thinking through that from a basic common sense standpoint, why would I throw my mortgage away, even if this house sucks for me, right? Even if I hate going up and down the stairs, I got a pool I don't want to maintain, my wife wants to divorce me, I should be going out and finding a new house, but I'm finding every opportunity I can to hang on to this mortgage with both hands, because I'm never going to get a deal as good as the deal I have right now. And you can kind of see that lock-in effect playing itself out across the MLS. And this, again, I think is where context really matters, right? Because for us to see those 40 and 50, and in some cases even 60% price declines, what it really took last time around was a flood of inventory coming onto the market. We had REOs, we had short sales, we had people who just wanted to cash in and move to Arizona or what have you while the getting was good. Well, at one point during the last housing cycle, we were running almost 18 months of inventory on the market. And yes, inventory is up. This is our unsold inventory index. You can see we ended the year at about 2.7 months of supply. But thinking through this through the lens of that kind of mortgage rate lock-in effect and the fact that I put money down and there's economic uncertainty out there, again, I just don't think we have the ingredients there that's going to cause a flood of inventory to come onto the market. Certainly not at the levels that it would take to really generate those kind of precipitous price declines. And I think when I did this event virtually, I want to say last year, I was talking about this stuff in the red, right? That the decline in transactions had started to filter through, and we were seeing inventory rise for the first time in a very long time. That wasn't because we were throwing all kinds of homes onto the market. It was just because the pace of sales had started to slow down. Sales are still relatively low, but now the new listings have dried up completely. And so when you kind of hold those numbers up to each other, the number of not new listings, but total active inventory is actually in retrenchment mode once again. And we're almost as tight as we've ever been. And I just don't see sellers needing to cut prices by 30 and 40 and 50% in a market where inventory is still so incredibly tight. It's true that the median time on market is up, so we were down in the low single digits in terms of how long it took to go from list to pending, and we're back in the kind of 30-day range here, which is a lot higher than that kind of 1 week spoiled environment that we had last year. Again, when rates were at 3%, you just throw it onto the MLS on Monday, you go out to lunch on Tuesday, and then you come back on Wednesday and look at all your over asking price offers and just figure out which one's gonna get you closed the quickest. Homes are taking a little bit longer to sell. This is important information for sellers to know. You're gonna sell it, you're gonna get a good price. There's still buyers that have a lot of money out there and a desire for home ownership, but we're just going back to something that's a little bit more normal. And I think, especially in a kind of post-pandemic world when days are like weeks and weeks are like months. You know, if you don't go pending in 3 days, you're like, why aren't you marketing my property and all of this stuff, and you get those angry voicemails. This is actually normal. You know, again, when my dad was a realtor back in the late 70s, early 80s, they had like 90-day median time on market. You had to just go sit at open house for months and months and months and be chasing leads and all of that. So this is scary to a seller, but it's not a particularly bad number objectively. You just have to go in with level set expectations that we're in a bit of a different market, slightly fewer buyers, you know, and a little bit of economic uncertainty out there. But what you don't see is, you know, the bottom falling out of the market here. And this is a really important chart, I think, because it shows the median reduction on reduced price properties. So we drop everybody that hasn't done a price reduction. So we look at all of the actives that are still active that have reduced price and just ask a simple question: how much they cut in price by? And if you go back to when rates were closer to 7%, that number was in the 6% range, right? The typical price reduction was about 6% on those actives that were having a hard time going pending. What's happened over the last 9 weeks? You can see that actually the discount, these are negative numbers, right? So going up is actually a good thing. But you know, the typical reduction is stabilizing in the kind of 5.5% range. What we don't see is this number going down and down and down, and that we have to continue to slash by bigger and bigger and bigger reductions to get these properties moved. And that is a function of the tight inventory, right? Because buyer demand has taken a step back, but we're at rock bottom in terms of supply, meaning that you don't have to get too crazy as a seller in order to get those properties moved. The market has shifted, rates are higher, slightly less buyers, but we are not in a kind of sell-off environment the way that maybe those newspaper headlines would have you believe. In fact, if you look at the data on how many of the actives have done a price reduction, and that's what I'm showing you here, you can see that as rates were going up, there was more and more sellers that were starting to do price reductions, but look what's happened over the course of the last 2 months, right? There's actually fewer active listings out there with reduced prices than there was even just a month or two ago. And so you have these buyers who've been scared off the market, just thinking the price reductions are gonna get bigger and bigger, everyone's gonna be desperate to sell me their home, and I'm gonna come in and name my price, and the data just simply doesn't support that. It shows in a market where there's still demand out there, maybe not as much as we enjoyed when rates were 2.65%, but inventory is also even tighter now, right? And so if you're waiting around, you could be shooting yourself in the foot and facing even tighter market down the road with prices that haven't declined and rates that might even be higher than what they are today before the dust settles on this Fed war against inflation. You can see that the percentage of homes that closed above list price, yes, last year it was like 75–80% of every closed transaction closed above list price. That dropped off to about 1 out of 5 homes back in December. But again, look at the last 6 weeks worth of data right up through the first half of February. There's actually more transactions closing above list again, and it just is a kind of a testament to the fact that you know, little movements in rates make a big difference, and that passion for home ownership is still alive and well. People have just got scared off of the market, and once they see opportunity, they come back in. And so I think these are the stories that we have to be able to tell, because you're not in the driver's seat in the same way that you were as a seller last year. As a buyer, you can't just come in and name your price or expect that the bottom is going to fall out of the market, and waiting 6 months means saving boatloads of money. And so again, it's not about convincing, it's about contextualizing so that they don't make a huge mistake listening to someone that isn't very keyed in on what's happening in the marketplace. The one exception to my no convincing rule is when it comes to the benefits of home ownership, because I think this is one of those things that really has fallen by the wayside when people are so focused on timing the market and the economic cycle, and they look at housing the way that they look at Bitcoin and want to make boatloads of money and buy low, sell high, and be a whiz-bang investor and all of that stuff. This is the #1 chart you should print out and just keep in your back pocket and take with you everywhere. This is real net worth per capita in the United States. We're going to get new data. The Fed does this every 3 years, but they don't publish it until like a year later. So we're going to get 2022 data in like 8 months from now, unfortunately. But it's going to show an even better number because we've had such crazy price appreciation. But the reason why I love this is because when you look at real net worth per capita, you can see that the typical household's worth about $122,000 in net worth. But if you segment that out between people who own their own home and people who rent, you can see that renting is not the recipe for success, right? There's people that will write papers that tell you how if you took the money that you put into your mortgage and instead, buy an S&P index fund and do this and that, you can end up just as well off as you would have been by owning a home. This data, the real data on actual household net worth, shows that that never actually materializes, right? When you just stay renting, you drive a better car, you have a killer watch, you go out and finance some rims and all of that stuff, and you never end up any better off financially than you would have been, right? And you can see here that in 2019, renters essentially had the same exact amount of net wealth that they had 30, 40 years ago. You just do not end up doing that, and that home ownership is the one and only path, proven path that's documented in the data where you actually accumulate wealth. Again, my dad didn't even graduate high school. The reason why I'm here doing nerdy speeches like this isn't because he had a bunch of PhD econ buddies. He owned his own home, and then that enabled me to go focus on being good at math and a spreadsheet nerd and all that stuff. That's what home ownership is all about. It's not about timing the market. And again, the long-term fundamentals of prices in California can only ever go one way, because we have so many people in this state and not enough homes to put them in. And that means that even as the economy has its ups and downs that sometimes bleed through into the housing market, over the long term, that price trend in California, again, can only ever go one way. So what does this mean for us in housing? We have economic uncertainty, we've got the negative impact of higher rates, but we've also got a tremendous amount of demand for, or passion for, home ownership, and folks that I think are starting to see some of the opportunities out there. If you look at that transaction chart that I showed you before, but you zoom it in just to the most recent 12 months, and you lean forward and really, really squint at that, you can see that actually we've done more transactions for the last 2 months in a row. Sales in December were actually higher than they were in November, and don't get me in trouble at work because we haven't released this yet, but sales in January were slightly higher than they were in December. I don't think we're gonna come rocketing back. It's not the time to fly off to Hawaii, kick your feet up on the desk, and phone in your, the rest of the year for your business. But it is noteworthy that I think we're probably at or pushing past even the bottom when it comes to transactions. I'm even more optimistic when you look at the pending numbers. You can see here that the level of pending sales is still relatively low through the first 6 weeks of 2023, right? And we're starting from a very low base, as I showed you in the mortgage applications data. But if you translate this into growth rates, you can see that the year is getting off to a much stronger start than is typical, right? If you look at 2021 or 2022, pending sales from December to January are typically up like 3, 4, 5, 6%, something like that. They're up a little bit more than that in February typically, but they really start to kind of ramp in earnest in March. If you look at the far right-hand side here, you can see that we had a 20% increase, again, from a depressed base, but the housing market is getting cranking much earlier than what we typically see, and that gives me hope, again, that we're kind of past that bottom, that low point for transactions. And so just to reiterate, I think the thing that you read all the time is the negatives, right? Rates are up. You have less purchasing power. We may or may not see an economic recession on the backs of consumers, but buyers totally forget that we're not seeing 8 out of 10 homes close above list, that you can actually have a contingent, sale and not have that be a scarlet letter on your RPA. You can even get sellers that'll come in and buy down your rate and create a kind of win-win where they get the number that they want and you're able to kind of make your numbers pencil. And again, the benefits of home ownership, I think, are still alive and well. Sellers, you just got to tell them, look, your neighbor, when they sold their house and got all those crazy offers, that was a once in a lifetime where rates were at an all-time low level. There's less buyers out there now. We've got to be more strategic, more realistic, but it's still a great time to sell your home, right? We're selling homes in a normal amount of time. Prices have barely budged and aren't expected to see the bottom fall out because, again, supply is so tight. And so if you go in strategically, if you have a killer agent who knows what they're doing and knows what's happening in the market, you're going to do incredible, but you just have to go in with the correct expectations. And so yes, if you look at our economic forecast, we have GDP down by 0.5%. That's a modest recession by any stretch, right? It's not a deep recession, but I do think that consumers are going to be up against it and potentially run out of gas a little bit. If you kind of overlay that on top of the California housing market, it means that we're going to see sales that are down for the year by about 7.2% this year. That's after a 23% decline last year, and we also have an 8.8% reduction in prices. But my caveat to that is that look at the level of sales. That's 317,000 units. If you remember that sales chart that I showed you before, we already hit 240,000. So that means that, again, the worst is behind us. It's just going to be a slow climb back to those kind of long run averages in the 400,000 unit range. And that even as prices are forecast to come down a bit, at least half or maybe even a little bit more than that is due to the fact that we're not selling as many homes in the kind of 10 million and up range compared to that super explosive growth. And so, yes, the market has shifted. Yes, there's less buyer demand out there. No, it is not 2008 all over again. And yes, it still absolutely makes sense to buy a home, assuming that you're getting into it for those long-term benefits, not just to kind of stroke your ego on what a great investor that you are. And so with that, I think it's just nose to the grindstone. Use the data as your friend and kind of provide that context and perspective. And I think, again, that's what's going to make you a hero, not just for the next 12 months, but you're going to have a book of business that's really going to rely on you going forward. So with that, I would just say thank you so much to the AOR for having me, and thank you all for your time.
Our next presenter is Gene Deering. He's with Radius Group Commercial Real Estate, and Gene takes a creative problem-solving approach in working with clients and brokering transactions. Over the past 13 years, it's helped him complete over 820 transactions valued at more than $1.1 billion, working in tandem with Bob Tuller and Paul Gambardella while at Radius. In fact, in 2018, the team completed 16 sales and 56 leases involving more than 770,000 square feet and valued at more than $97 million. That's a lot of commercial property, guys. Prior to joining Radius, Gene began his career working for C.B. Richard Ellis in 2004. And a former college athlete, Gene takes consistency and performance to a whole other level, two traits that led to promotions to senior VP in 2017 and then principal in 2018. He also doesn't shy away from a challenge, stepping up to be the featured presenter at the annual Radius Forecast during the past 2 years. Gene, where are you? And maybe I should have had some more jokes, because I don't know if he's ready for you yet, but take the mic.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about office, industrial, retail, land, hospitality on the South Coast. And I was told I've got about 15 minutes to cover all those things, so I figure we would go ahead and start with track and field. That makes a lot of sense. So for those of you that don't know me, I love sports. I love competing. And figured I'd use this race where Usain Bolt sets a new world record in the 100-meter, and Usain represents the residential real estate market. There we are, commercial, lane 7. So we always trail you guys. Typically, that spread is about 6 months. So that's something we're going to watch. Your market slowed. We had a big finish to our year in 2022. And are we going to have a little more slowing? And as you guys pick up, how are we going to pick up in 2023? So there's 2022 for last year, and banner year. The year before was our biggest year. This is commercial sales, 129 last year. We're not going to do this again this year. 53% of those were off-market transactions. So we saw a lot of 1031 money chasing deals, and even as interest rates went up, we kept seeing those transactions, and December was a very big month. So then looking at multifamily, this is 5 units and above, so 24 sales for last year. Compared to the last 15 years, not quite on the podium, but it was active in the multifamily sector as well. I would guess we're probably right around there, maybe a little bit lower in 2023, but active in all types of our market. So now I want to talk about some of the bigger sales, some of the exciting real estate that did trade hands last year. One of those was the Riviera Business Park. Most of you are probably familiar with this property up next to the El Encanto. Incredible piece of real estate, 8.5 acres. I think there's 92,000 square feet of building. And this was one of those off-market deals, sold for $26.8 million. Look at that with a residential lens. That's only 289 bucks a foot. A 92,000 square foot house up there would be a big number. I think this buyer at 26.8 did very well. Now there's some occupancy and zoning challenges up there, but in terms of marquee real estate like that, we're not going to see anything like that built, especially in that area. So that was one of those sales that kind of jumped off the page at us. Another one you may have heard about, Las Aves. This is over by the bird refuge. So Runyon Group bought this. They paid $19.2 million. That's 608 bucks a foot. And they're sort of working off how great Coast Village Road is doing. The rates on Coast Village Road very high. There's not a lot available. And they're going to continue to cut this property into small spaces because that's what's moving. Small retail, small office, leasing at a big number. They also picked up for $7 million the Stella Mari and the Montecito fitness space right there in addition. So they've made a big investment in that kind of bird refuge triangle, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they do with that development. It's got great parking if you're coming from Montecito. Another deal that got a lot of attention last year is the QAD campus. So this is 29 acres overlooking the freeway, just a spectacular piece of real estate. As reported by the Pacific Coast Business Times, it was a $104 million sale, and that deal, you know, is pretty incredible. That real estate for 865 bucks a foot, it is one of the marquee pieces of real estate, not just in this area, in the commercial side, but in the entire state, and it'll be interesting to see what the University of California does with that. As a gaucho, I'm hoping there's alumni events and fundraisers because it'd be great to get a lot of people that haven't seen that property up there and experience just how cool it is. So moving into downtown Santa Barbara, I thought 111 East Victoria paints a pretty nice picture of some challenges in the office sector. This sold for $12.6, 2014. It sold again in December 21 for $12.2. So a lot of real estate appreciated during that time period. It sold first with a tenant. When it was vacant, it sold for a little bit less. New owners, I don't know how they did it. They leased it to UCLA for $4.11 a square foot triple net. That's about $1 over market. So they took care of the uncertainty, immediately put it on the market at $29 million, which is asking a 4 cap. I don't think this is going to trade at a 4 cap. Those days are kind of gone as rates have gone up, but they did very well on the investment because they found that credit long-term tenant that is hard to find. I would say that's probably like a 5 cap deal in today's market, and we'll see what happens with that property. So now looking at office vacancy, we'll start with Carpinteria, which has changed the most. You'll see office vacancy in Carpinteria went from 4% to 26%. That big change was mainly related to Procore. They put about 80,000 square feet on the market for sublease, and because the Carp office market is so small, we see those pretty wild changes in vacancy rates. And this space that's on the market for sublease is incredible. It's the cool tech office space you envision, 50,000 square feet in the building on the left and 28,000 square feet in their main campus, asking $210 to $220 a square foot triple net. And they're looking for bigger tenants. So they won't entertain a 5,000 square foot tenant. They're looking for 15, 20, 25 square foot tenants. There aren't a lot of those. The tech office world has changed. Goleta and Carpinteria are now sitting on a lot of vacancy that we just wouldn't have imagined because these tech groups kept growing and taking space, and now the live-work balance and people working from home, those tech groups are still making money and they don't need the office space. Here we are in Appfolio, now we're in Goleta, and this is Appfolio's headquarters. They put about 80,000 square feet on the market for sublease, asking $172 triple net. And it's everything you think of when you think of tech office, cool break areas, baristas, lounge spaces, and them too they're in a tough spot because they need big tenants. So they don't need the 5,000 square foot startup out of the garage. They need a 20,000 square foot tenant, and those are tough. So right now there's no real pain because the companies are making money and doing well, and they're still paying rent. But when some of these leases turn, we may see something else in the future. So here's Goleta and Santa Barbara office vacancy below 10%, and this includes sublease space. So we're doing a lot better than other markets. We saw a lot of lease transactions in 2022, and for smaller office space, that market remains pretty vibrant, especially on the higher end. And keep in mind, these numbers include sublease space. So a lot of markets will quote a 30% office vacancy. They're not including their sublease space, and that changes it further. So industrial-wise, there's nothing out there. 3% in Goleta, 0.1% in Santa Barbara. If you have a roll-up door, you have a tenant, huge demand among lenders for people to buy these properties. There just isn't a lot of space with roll-up doors where you can store and distribute goods. I just talked to an agent in Ventura, and even the Ventura County industrial market is 0.4% vacancy. So it's definitely high in demand, and sort of shown by this deal from last year. This was the biggest lease of last year, 71,000 square feet. UCSB leased in the Cabrillo Business Park. This is sort of over behind Target, and these were spec buildings that were built. Look at that rate, $1.90 for warehouse flex space, when we were talking about Appfolio asking $1.72. This developer was in a good spot because UCSB needs seismically upgraded buildings. We don't have a lot of new buildings, and they were handsomely rewarded for building those spec buildings, which we don't see a lot of even in our strong market here. So something that I'm most excited about, and we're seeing more and more of, is adaptive reuse. In our town, it is very difficult to develop from the ground up, and we've seen a number of groups take some older buildings, convert them into something that's in higher demand, and it's a win-win for everyone. So I'll start with 16 West Mission. This used to be a rundown office complex. It was about 50% vacant, and it was in need of a lot of TLC. An investment group came in and bought it and turned it into 23 incredibly high-end apartment units that are rented for good rates. They've got laundry in each of the rooms, in high demand. This developer paid $4 million, sold it in December for $11.8. So they obviously invested a lot in it, but they had a reward, and it's kind of a good story that hopefully we can share with other groups to do these transitions, because we're talking about a 3-year period, and some of these developments, you could be talking about 8 to 10 years to kind of reposition some of those assets. So looking at some other stories of this adaptive reuse, 2 weeks ago, the Drift Hotel opened, 524 State. This used to be the Church of Scientology. There was kind of some funky retail downstairs, not much going on in the office upstairs. Now it's 45 keys, high-end hotel, and it's a great thing for the 500 block. You think of 90 or 45 hotel rooms, that could be 90 people out having dinner, shopping, activating State Street. So that was a nice win that that developer was able to make that transition and get it open this quick. Another adaptive reuse deal that just closed. This is 1919-1921 State. Sort of a 3-story medical office building. Always hard to keep this building full. And investor came in and bought it, and they're going to convert it either to residential or a keyless hotel. They paid $9.2 million, $357 a foot. Now that's important. For these conversions, if you're going to spend $200 a foot cleaning up the building, you need to buy it cheap enough to be able to do that. And this was a situation where the buyer was able to do that, and hopefully they can get through the process pretty quickly. One more of these adaptive reuse stories, 800 Garden Street, this 2-story office product. Again, dated, a lot of vacancy, some challenges with the property. Group came in and bought it, and they're doing one of these keyless hotels there. You know, no lobby, you get kind of a QR code, and you go to your door, and it's gonna do well. It'll revitalize that area a little bit. So those are kind of like the smaller pieces, and now some of the big pieces. 701 State Street, where Macy's was, 132,000 feet. They're trying to find tech office. They're trying to find really big tech office tenants to fill this at $345 gross. Those tech office or tenants are hard to find. Unless Facebook, Google, Microsoft, some of those big groups come to this building, it's going to be a challenge. City of Santa Barbara owns the dirt under the building through 2065. So in my mind, this is an opportunity. The city needs to sell that dirt so investor will come in, take the buildings down, and build us something that we really need. Here's Nordstrom, 165,000 square feet. I'm guessing this room spent quite a bit of money in this Nordstrom building over the years. Similar story. It's going to be a challenge to find tenants to fill this building. This building's laid out a little bit better than Macy's shape and windows, so I think it's more possible here, but it's just going to be a challenge, and I think our downtown, our State Street, needs this to become residential. Here's a look at a rendering of what they plan to do, and it would be cool as can be tech space. I just don't know if the tenant demand exists to fill that, and that's going to hurt State Street if it remains vacant and in that condition. So now let's go up to La Cumbre Plaza. So the Macy's parcel up here and next door, they're looking at building 685 apartment units. These are units that we need to meet our state demand. We need the units, and this is a great site for it. So because it's ground up, here's a look at a rendering of what those units will look like. They're hoping to start construction in 2028, and there's some complexity to this deal, but that sort of time horizon tells you how long it'll take to get new construction built. Right next to that, Sears leased to Mattress Mike's for 89 cents a foot gross, 70,000 square feet, kind of a placeholder until this property owner can hopefully build multifamily on that site. So a big deal, and I think Mattress Mike's is doing really well there. At 90 cents a foot gross, that's a good place to be. All right, so I want to talk about one exciting project, Carpinteria. This is on Linden. This is 700 Linden, basically a block of Carpinteria, and it's kind of the first time we're getting some of that kind of funk zone feel coming to Carpinteria. Cool design, smaller spaces, and I think this may be one to watch that if it does well and comes off and builds the energy they're hoping it's going to build, that little lower strip of Carpinteria may have a little bit of a different feel than what it's had. So just kind of a cool project to keep an eye on. That's it for the drone video. I want to thank, where's Justin Diem? Justin took all the drone video, and he is kind of he's the State Street expert. So if you have clients with buildings on State, tenants looking, Justin is the guy to talk to. So big picture, looking at what we covered. We had this huge year last year. There were 5 commercial sales in January. It's a pretty slow month. But I would say by the end of the first quarter, we're going to know if we're on pace for 80% of last year or 60% of last year. And we're kind of waiting for that data. Just found out about 3 or 4 deals that'll close in the next week on the commercial side. So I'm more optimistic than some about what our market's going to look like. I talked about tech office, kind of the challenges of those larger tech spaces. That's going to be something to watch. And adaptive reuse. How can the state, how can the city help give developers a clear path to what they can do? Because if they know what they can do, they'll take the risk and keep buying some of these buildings and repurposing them. And just can we make that path easy for them, because all of our market wins. So with that, I'm done. Thanks, guys.
Our next presenter is Kat Hitchcock. Kat is the lead agent on her team, Hitchcock and Associates. She's been in the industry for a decade now and has since tripled her business and grown her presence in our marketplace and down south. She services both buyers and sellers in our markets, so she's able to have an inside perspective during a rapidly changing market. Over the past several years, she has achieved a reputation in Santa Barbara for providing quality real estate service based on integrity, knowledge, and professionalism. Will you please welcome, and I just found this out, the Texas Chainsaw. Okay.
Thank you, Paul, for this super nice intro. I'm really excited to be here today. I will say y'all could have given me an easier year to do this, but here we go. So I thought we would start out by showing what life has been like.
Excuse me, is that apple for sale? Yeah, we're about to put it on sale right now, actually. Well, I'm in the market, so tell me about your apple. Why should I buy it? Nice try. Okay, people, here's how this is gonna work. I have an apple here. The highest bidder's going home with this. I want all bids in the next 2 minutes, then we're closing it. Bidding starts at $5.
Feeling pretty confident there, huh? I mean, don't you think?
$10.
He said starting at 5.
15.
Is this a new apple?
Yeah, just listed. I'm pre-qualified. I'll pay cash. I got cash. 20, 30, 40. No, just make it 45.
Is it even worth that?
50. I don't know. Please, this is the 8th apple I've tried to buy.
Could I at least see it up close?
Nope, it's an apple. You know what it is. You either want it or you don't. I'll take it for 100.
What? I'm from California. It's the cheapest apple I've ever seen.
120.
Why did I do that? Why? I don't.
So by the end of 2022, that's pretty nice. Buyers acted like it was 2008, and sellers acted like it was still 2021. So hopefully we can all laugh about that now, but my job today is to go over the general market, which is defined as 3 million and under, the themes that defined our 2022 market, with statistics backing that information, and why we are all here, our 2023 forecast. So theme number 1, the biggest hot topic, is interest rates. So how are interest rates affecting our days on market and percent to list to close price ratios? And the buyer mentality, how are our buyers reacting to this, and how is this affecting our very little amount of listings that we have? So we thought it'd be really interesting to show y'all a graph of how much the days on market have slowed with the rate increase. So yellow line being your rates, blue bars are the days on market. So early in the year, all the way to November, it more than doubled, which is crazy. So how many of y'all had buyers that were circling the beginning of the year, and then right when the rates went up, they can no longer afford it? Y'all better be raising some hands. I'm like, come on. And how many of y'all have a lot of buyers who are just saying, we're gonna wait and see what happens with the market? Yeah. So a lot of like Q3, Q4, there was a lot of like, let's wait, let's see what happens in the market. And I feel like we have been so spoiled by that 3% interest rate. It was a really big punch in the gut for a lot of our buyers. We all know in this room, 5 to 6% is relatively normal, and I think it's just taken some time for buyers to come back. And this is a great indicator of how our rates are driving our market with what happened in January. We had a little bit of a dip in the interest rates, and the days on market about cut in half. So next slide is showing you the average mortgage interest rate compared to the median sales price. So yellow is your rate again, pink is the home and estate PUD median sales price, and blue is the condo median sales price. So as y'all can see, the home and estate is a roller coaster every single month, but the condo market has seemingly been unaffected. I know that we personally had buyers that are on that 1.4, 1.5 price point, but once those rates went up, they were down to like more of a 1.1, 1.2, and that's gonna push them more into a condo market. They're gonna have a lot more inventory. So I think in 2023, we're gonna see a lot more people in the condo market, and they're gonna continue to have a bigger buyer pool just purely because of affordability. And speaking of affordability, this is one of my favorite slides. This is showing you what a buyer has to make annually to be able to qualify for the median sales price in Santa Barbara. So this is someone buying a primary home and estate. The example of the buyer, they're putting 20% down, they have great credit, low debt. So in 2020, they had to make $199,000. Fast forward to 2023, you now have to make $307,000 annually. Year over year, that's on average a 15% increase in pay that someone has to make in order to afford the median sales price in Santa Barbara, which is pretty wild to see. So theme number 2, less listings selling for over list price. So the pricing strategies that did not serve us towards the end of last year, and how this is affecting our sellers. So this graph is showing you percent listing to sold price median for the home and estates and PUD. The bottom of the graph here, you see everything by month and by year, and the left-hand grid is showing you percent of list, so 100 would be full ask. So things really got out of control in 2021. No one could even shop at whatever they were even pre-approved for. I mean, how many of y'all told someone to shop under what they were pre-approved for? I mean, probably everyone. If I had a buyer that was pre-approved for $2 million, I said, do not go over 1.8 because we had to leave that cushion for some competition, and I knew there was gonna be 10 or 15 offers on the table, and it was gonna go well over ask. So if y'all fast forward to Q3, Q4 on this chart, we are back to where we were in 2020, and we are below that 4-year average line of 97.5%. I know in prior years, we would price things a little bit under ask in anticipation for 15 or 20 offers, the whole less is more strategy. But mid-year, when things are drastically changing, the risk was just too high to go with that pricing strategy. For instance, this is our listing at 30 Calle Capistrano. Super cute house, one of the best streets in San Roque. My client had it appraised at 1.9 when we took the listing. I thought that was a little high, I thought easily 1.7. Our sellers were already in escrow on something else, so time was of the essence. We're like, let's get this going. We listed it for 1,595. I thought I would easily have 10 offers in the first week. We set for 2 weeks and no offers. And at that point, our team was like, wow, the market has for sure changed. We then started calling agents that sold a lot in San Roque, and every single one of them was like, wait, I thought you got offers already. So not that we became lazy, but we became very conditioned to see the hot sheet and never go back to past inventory of what did not sell. So we thankfully found 2 people. We did go over, but nowhere near where I thought we were gonna be. And if y'all remember at that time, there was like so much hysteria, so much negative news. The Wall Street Journal's talking about the looming housing crash. Stock market's doing some really unsettling things. So I feel like buyers were really frozen with fear and just missed out on this opportunity, unfortunately. So theme number 3, because of the drastic changes that we had in our market, properties that were purchased in like the COVID boom time and then resold second half of last year probably did not go so well. I was hearing some people that having buyer remorse because they bought via FaceTime, or maybe the whole work from home was no longer an option. So we have 2 examples here. This is a courtesy of Stan Tabler. He helped his buyer purchase his property from the Manzo Loft team in 2021. They had it listed for 2.15. Of course, they sold in 5 days and sold it for 2.365. Fast forward to the next year, Stan's buyer says, Stan, I don't need this property more, I don't use it. So it's October, things have drastically changed. So Stan, being the smart guy that he is, listed it for 2.3987, just a little bit above what his client purchased it for, but still had to wait an entire month for 1 offer under asking. Next example is 727 Avenida Pequena. This was listed by Carmen Galzerano at Berkshire Hathaway. She listed it for $1,075,000 in January of last year. Y'all, she got 20 offers on that property and sold it for 1.43 to our buyers. But guess what? We were in the highest offer. We were in backup position number 1. Her first escrow fell through, and thankfully we were able to close it with our client. Okay, fast forward 9 months. Client calls, says, Kat, I found something else I like more. I want to buy that property, and I need you to sell this one. So panic set in again because of what just happened in my San Roque property. I knew the reality of how much the market had changed and what her expectation was going to be with the sale. So we had a very honest conversation. Thankfully, she took our advice and listed it just under what she purchased it for. We ended up getting immediately 2 offers, but still sold under list price. So these are just giving you all great examples of how much the market shifted in just a 9-month period of time. And our final theme, theme number 4, our number 1 issue going into 2023 is lack of inventory. So this is showing you inventory month by month. We pulled 2019 as sort of a healthy time, normal time pre-pandemic. Left-hand grid showing y'all months of inventory. So if you're looking at this graph, especially in 2022, you would think we're in like an intense, crazy seller's market. But based on what I showed y'all for the percent listing to sold price median, we were entering into totally new territory end of last year. A neutral market, we were seeing things come down. We were able to negotiate again, which I hadn't done that in so long for a buyer, so it was nice. We're entering into new territory. So your perspective of the inventory also might be influenced by the bracket, the price bracket your buyers were looking in. So we found this really fascinating. So we pulled 2019 again as a normal time pre-COVID. So the sales for under $1 million, this is for home and estates, for $1 million for a single family home, we sold 354 homes in 2019. We sold 50 last year. Wow. Our bread and butter, 1 to 2 million. We had a rise for the last 4 years, but we sold less in 2022 than we did in all past 3 years. And for the elusive 2 to 3 million, this is really fascinating. We sold more in 2022 than we did in 2019. We sold 86 in 2019 and all the way to 169 this past year. So we think this is obviously due to the median sales price being on the rise. So a larger share is going to be in the higher end. So what does our future hold? Where are we going? Y'all, I wish I knew, but here are a couple of things I feel very confident about. So inventory will remain tight. So why aren't sellers selling? There's a thing called a mortgage lockdown. Did y'all know January of this year, 63% of homeowners are in under that 4% interest rate? Thank you, Austin Lamson, for helping me with this graph. It shows you a great visual of how many people are in that nice low interest rate. So why would a seller sell? So I think the major drivers in our market is going to be due to life circumstance, things happening in people's life that they have to sell or buy. We call them the 4 Ds: distress, disuse, divorce, and death. I think those would be the major drivers in our transactions for this year. Condo market will remain untouched. Because of the affordability, we're going to have a lot of first-home buyers, downsizers, relo. I think condos are going to remain strong. Interest rates will remain in control of our market. If inventory stays low, we won't see a reduction in prices. I think we're just going to stabilize. I don't think we're going to see a huge increase in prices, but it's really hard to say because I feel like buyer competition is all of a sudden back the past couple weeks. I think we're just in a very rate-driven market for both buyers and sellers. And finally, for all the haters out there that said that the housing market was crashing. As we all know in this room, post-07, when things were coming apart, that was because of the mortgage industry. From 2008, 2010, we had so much inventory, but we had no buyers. So we had to drop the prices to seek those buyers. We now have the exact opposite problem. And I know in this room we've had like a really incredible few years. Yes, we are in a major shift that is just part of the real estate cycle. I think this year will feel a little bit like deja vu. And I'm just thankful that we live in a place that is so amazing. There's a worldwide demand to be here. The community, the culture, the climate, this is amazing. And does it matter what their interest rates are doing or the market's doing? There's always going to be a demand to live here. So I thank y'all for letting me be here. I want to thank Cara and Kylie for all their help with this. Kylie pulled all this data by hand, which takes a lot of time and effort, so thank you ladies so much. And thank y'all so much for having me. It's been fun.
Oh, George Santos just posted he's in escrow on a $300 million property on Podaro Lane. I think our next presenter is going to be able to tell us if that's really true or not. Cristal Clarke represents the highest level of clientele and specializes in sale and acquisition of extraordinary estates and land in Montecito, Santa Barbara, Hope Ranch, Carpinteria, and the surrounding communities. She remains committed to the excellence that buyers and sellers of the finest homes demand. She maintains status as a top agent both locally and globally, having ranked the #1 individual agent for sales volume and units sold in the Santa Barbara MLS, and is the #1 individual agent for Berkshire Hathaway Home Services California properties worldwide. That's pretty impressive. Sales in excess of $415 million in 2021 and $313 million in 2022, and that's bigger than a lot of companies. So that's pretty impressive. Would you please welcome Cristal Clarke?
It's an honor to be here today and really appreciate the opportunity. So if I can do a little poll here, how many people think the luxury market is in the $2 to $5 million range? If you can raise your hand. Okay. How about 5 million to 10 million? And how about above 10 million? Okay. Well, all of you are right. And, you know, I think it's an amazing place that we all live and an amazing place that we have the opportunity to work in. And it's an area where there's so much beauty here, and it has, over the last few years, brought in so many people that have come to Santa Barbara and Montecito and absolutely loved being here. We've been very fortunate in selling real estate here, very fortunate in the high end. The high end is a very wonderful niche of properties, mainly in Montecito and in Hope Branch. It's a great place to enjoy, the daily life that we all live here. So going into the thoughts are, the average sale price in Santa Barbara is $3.2 million. And the average sales price in Montecito is $6.25. And in Hope Branch, $6.1 million. So the average sale price nationally is $467,000. So keep in mind this perspective. The average home in Santa Barbara is 5 times the national average and 15 times more in Montecito and Hope Branch. So it's a very unique market, and we treat every client like it's a luxury sale. I mean, I've sold properties from $700,000 condos to $23 million estates, and I treat each one of those buyers and sellers as a luxury property. I think we all have to keep that in mind, because where we live is very different from a lot of places, and it's really phenomenal to be here. So I've got some slides that are going through. Some of these are current listings that I have, and then some are sales that happened last year. So a lot of people will ask questions about the luxury market. How has the luxury buyer's mood changed? In a lot of ways. We've just come off of an amazing last 2 years, 2021 and 2022. And we had an influx of buyers coming from so many places, but mainly Los Angeles and San Francisco, who wanted to be here and wanted to be here for safety reasons, especially because of COVID. And we have so many young families that have moved to Montecito. It's quite amazing, and it's been such a great shift because it's brought so much energy in, and I think with that it brings better restaurants, better retail shops. It's a whole cycle. It's like a domino effect. And the question is, what is the buyer looking for in the luxury market? Most buyers, especially during our COVID time period, and even last year, they want something that's done. They want something that's remodeled. And the remodel needs to be done within the last couple of years. So it has the current look that are in all the Architectural Digest, veranda magazines, what's out there, the color schemes. So if you had a property that was like that, you were getting top dollar. If you didn't, then it could sit on the market a while. But what we're finding in today's market is properties that are in A+ locations and that are done, you'll have buyers for those. Properties that are in, maybe a B or C location that had sold during the height of our market are no longer selling like that. They're taking a lot longer to sell. Construction cost has gone up quite a bit. Interest rates, as you all, there's cats, y'all, that you know that's going on. It's been tough for buyers. Mainly in the luxury market, it's all cash, but sometimes financial advisors will advise their clients to put some type of a mortgage on the property. But I really find most of the properties that sell are cash. So a buyer, is cognizant of all of that, and they want to pay prices that are normal prices that they can justify. They don't want to pay pay prices that are going so far over. I think those days are a little on the high-end luxury. It's not as frequent as we were seeing in 2022. I think the top of our market was really the spring of 2022. And properties were flying off the shelves, flying off high numbers, And then all of a sudden, the end of the summer came, and it was like a whiplash. And it was almost like people were saying, there was like this stop. And it was so unusual because the market for all of us was going so fast. And then all of a sudden, it started to slow down, but it slowed down, at least for us, I felt rather quickly. And then going into the fall, properties took longer to sell. I think if properties come on that are priced right and are remodeled, they are going to sell and going to have buyers. There's buyers out there. Our problem is inventory, I think, for all of us. We just don't have enough inventory. And it's really, really hard because you've got buyers that want to buy here, but we don't have the homes in order to sell them. So in the $5 to $10 million range, there was 91 sales in 2022. Currently, there are 16 active listings and 8 pending listings. The 10 million and up market, there were 50 sales in 2022, with 30 active currently and 4 pending sales. A lot of properties were sold off market. So in 2022, there were about 30 properties sold off market. Most of those were in Montecito. And in this year, 2023, there's approximately 4. So comments on insurance. And insurance has been a huge issue for us in the high end, especially in Montecito. Hope Ranch has been doing great with insurance, but Montecito has been really tough. For the high-end market, I had one property that sold last year that they were quoted $180,000. I've had other properties, like that property, there the client didn't even get insurance. It was a quick sale, 5 days. But insurance has been a really tough situation. We thought on that property, it was going to be at least $200,000. So the good news is State Farm's come back into the market. We have more insurance companies coming back in. It's creating a better competition, a better ease. So it's not as bad as it's been the last couple of years, and that was our real challenge. We had a lot of buyers who could easily pay $15 or $20 million for a house, and all of a sudden they're stuck with, close to $150,000 to $200,000, or $150,000 to $200,000 to pay for insurance, and that's a lot of money. Another comment on anything about the debris flow that we had in Montecito. That topic has really gone away. It's not so big anymore. We were certainly tested this year when we had the heavy rains, and I think the crews that have done such a great job over the last few years to clean those basins out, it really paid off well. I think Montecito was great. Unfortunately, the news likes to create negativity. John Palmentary was down on Coast Village Road, right by Olive Mill. There was a little bit of mud, not a lot at all, and all of a sudden the news just gets wildly exaggerated, and my phone's ringing off the hook from my neighbors who have second homes, and how is it? And I'm like, it's fine. I walked the whole neighborhood, called everybody up. I went around to clients' homes because I didn't evacuate. I walked through San Ysidro Ranch, that was fine. I called clients up and said, do you want me to walk your property? Because they don't know, they're hearing all this negative news. And they're at some hotel in Santa Barbara, they don't know what's happening. So I think overall, we did a great job, but the news has a tendency to really go on negative knowledge. But overall, I think not a lot of people will talk about that anymore when they come to see their agents. So you probably want some stories. So comments on significant sales and stories. You know, it was a very interesting last couple of years. We had so many people come that were from San Francisco, that were tech people that moved here. We had people from the entertainment world, a lot of people from the entertainment world. Those are people that are behind the camera, people that are in front of the camera. I wish I could tell you, you know, who some of my clients are, but I have NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and I'm super private about that. I don't talk about it to anybody. I'm just very respectful of them. But I would say that Montecito has really gotten a lot of stars that have come into the fold. But the one thing that they really like is that so many people leave them alone. It's a really beautiful place to live, and they don't have the paparazzi. They don't have, you know, everyone hovering over them. They can kind of live their life and just act normally, and which is a nice thing for them. I mean, I get calls from all those magazines and TMZ, and I mean, when Harry and Meghan moved into town, I was selling a property for just under $11 million, and for some reason, my phone started ringing at 5 a.m. From London, and someone had told them that Harry and Meghan had bought a house, something that had a $10 million loan on it. Well, they thought it was my client's property, that it wasn't. And so I called my client up early and I said, okay, be prepared. I said, my phone's ringing off the hook. Helicopters were flying over his property, and he has a gate, and so he was expecting some people to come that were going to be working on his property, and he buzzed them in, and he didn't realize they were all reporters. And the reporters came in, the neighbors were all upset, they were screaming at him, how could you do this, how could you do this? And he calls me and goes, what's going on? I said, I warned you. So that's the only time that I felt really had a lot of paparazzi in town. Other than that, it's been pretty easy going. I think that as far as significant sales, I mean, there was a beautiful property down at the beach that sold for $23 million. It sold with multiple offers. It sold at a very good number. And I can't tell you who bought that, but it was a very nice transaction. Certain properties that had lasted on the market for a while. Do you guys remember that beautiful mid-century modern on the corner of Channel Drive and Butterfly?
Oh, yeah.
That, I don't know, I think maybe I was the 6th agent, maybe the 7th agent over the years. It was just the right timing on that one. And that sold last year for 16.8. That one sold. Great property. I mean, someone's going to turn that into an amazing mid-century, take it back to its glory. But a property like that had been on the market for so long, for so many years, all of a sudden sold in that market that we had, that kind of frothy market. And another one was a property in Hope Ranch on Cuervo that ended up selling for $18.5 million. That took 3 months of negotiation, even during a very frothy market. And it's interesting because the high end, you have smaller amount of buyers that can afford that range. And they still want to get a good price and they still want to negotiate. It's not like they all went over quite a bit in asking price. A lot of times they didn't. But there's some beautiful properties that are amazing, and I feel very blessed to work here. My predictions, I think that we're still in a very good market. I think it's a market where buyers don't want to overpay. They want to pay market value. It depends on, where you are, in that 5 to 10 million range, there's more buyers than that. When you start getting into that 10 to 15, there's still buyers, but once you start getting up into that 15, 20, 25, 30 and up, there's smaller and smaller buyer pool. So they are there, they do want to buy, they still want to be here. And I think we'll still continue to see a lot of buyers that are in the market that would like to purchase here, but they just want to buy right. So thank you all today. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to a really good year. I think if we get more inventory, we'll sell more, but inventory is the key game. So it's going to be really interesting to see if we get more homes on the market. So I know everyone's out there trying to get new listings, and they're coming on, which is a good thing. I know of a few things in the works, so that'll be nice for everybody to participate in that. So thank you.
Thank you, Cristal. I want to thank our local knowledge here. It's not easy when we give everybody an assignment and give them an outline of what to say and to be in front of their peers. It sounds like it's an easy chore for them, but this takes a lot of effort, and as Kat will attest to, a lot of hours to put everything together. So we want to say thank you, thank you, thank you again. Please give them a